If you're a marketer and you've not been living under a rock for the last 10 years, you've probably heard the term CX being thrown around a lot. And although the theory around CX goes back as far as the 1950s, it's really only the last decade that it reached fever pitch as new technologies allowed real-time surveying and closed-loop feedback to become a possibility. Now, although most executives understand that CX is important, not many really understand why and how it benefits your business. And it's no wonder. Recent literature on the CX topic is highly fragmented. Various blogs, white papers, and thought leadership pieces create hype on the topic, but really provide any serious statistical evidence to demonstrate the benefits of CX for businesses. So I've decided to take a few minutes to explain how so many companies have come to be obsessed with CX and what benefits you might be able to expect from a good CX program in your business. If you haven't heard the term CX before, it just means customer experience. And in a nutshell, it basically refers to the experiential aspects of buying things. A really straightforward example might be going to the grocery store to buy some milk. And when you get there, the milk might not be in its usual location. Maybe the store smells and maybe the attendant is rude to you at the checkout. Although you've technically bought your milk, and it's probably delicious, the fact is that you've had a bad experience, and that's probably going to impact your likelihood of buying milk from that particular store in future. As I mentioned, customer experience management isn't a new concept. Research on the topic goes back to the middle of the 20th century when the marketing field first really started to emerge in corporate America, but was always more of a given, with companies using expressions like the customer is always right or the customer comes first. It was never really a serious scientific field. It was more about intuition and giving people the best service possible. However, things really started to change fast at the turn of the century when two key things happened. The first big change was a rapid shift to digital customer management. As the internet and big data first started to become a reality, more and more companies were forced to invest in customer relationship managements, also known as CRMs. Now, if you're unfamiliar with CRMs, they're basically digital databases that allow companies to track customer interactions, including purchase details, representatives, historical issues, and anything else that might be relevant. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, as the internet really started to permeate through the business world, CRMs were a massive area for investment. It started with B2B organizations who had always maintained customer logs, but they were difficult for anyone other than reps to use because they were often handwritten and stored in decentralized office locations. But the internet changed that by allowing customer records to be shared virtually instantaneously with head offices. For business to customer businesses, CRMs became popular during the early days of cloud environments, which at a rudimentary level are basically giant servers that can be accessed from anywhere in the world. And this was the genesis of big data, which, as we all know, is now a core function for most large organizations. The size and scope of investment that was required to set up cloud environments and integrate CRMs meant the C-suite often had to be involved. And as a result, customer experience was no longer just a marketing issue, but had a direct line of sight for many CEOs who needed to justify such large spending to their boards and shareholders. As a result, a lot of increased pressure was put on marketers to demonstrate return on investment, which required an elevation from basic customer service to really structured customer experience methodologies. The second big thing that happened was an increased focus on human psychology. Although marketing has been an important business function for many years, before the 1990s and early 2000s, it was really looked upon as a secondary business function. For example, if you looked at the average C-suite profile in America prior to 2000, you'd almost exclusively find accountants, economists, or technical specialists such as engineers. And that's because historically these areas were considered the more serious business fields. But an interesting thing happened in 2002 when Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in Economic Science. His research showed for the first time that the historical assumption of most economic models that human purchase decisions are rational is in fact wrong. And that meant a lot of traditional business decision making had been extremely limited. Now, if you're thinking this all sounds a bit familiar, it might be because in our last video we spoke about Arjan's theory of planned behavior, which was based on research conducted in 1975. We also spoke about Kahneman's early work into heuristics and biases from around the same time period. Both of these works were seminal in the marketing field for many, many years prior to 2000, but it wasn't until then that the broader economic community and other business fields started to really sit up and notice. Kahneman's focuses on hedonic psychology, which argues that consumer behavior is normally best predicted by what makes experiences in life pleasant or unpleasant. His research demonstrated that feelings of pain, pleasure, interest, and boredom are highly important in the purchase decision journey. As part of this work, he also spoke quite extensively about the relevance of satisfaction and dissatisfaction. When Kahneman received the Nobel Prize, it created a lot of excitement with boards and C-suites across the world, many of whom were hearing this type of logic for the first time, or at the very least they were willing to accept that it was valid thinking for the first time and not pseudo-Jungian nonsense. As a result, a big focus started to emerge on how customers feel and how satisfaction might be leveraged to maximize market performance. And of course, the most obvious place to start was with the CRM systems that they'd all been investing in. In its most simplistic form, CX aims to use rapid customer feedback to help guide actionable marketing initiatives that elevate total customer lifetime value, also known as CLV. CLV is a fairly simple calculation that looks at the total revenue a company can generate from any one customer. Now, there's a bunch of different ways to calculate CLV, but it basically always includes three components. The first is the average number of transactions, and that is how many times does the customer on average purchase products from your business. The second is the average transaction value, and that is how much do people spend on average each time they purchase one of your products. And finally, they then look at the average margin, which is basically your average profit margin for each of those products. Investment in CX is based on the belief that by enhancing customer experiences, customers are more likely to make repeat purchases and thereby increase their CLV. But of course, the question is, does it actually work? And this is where the water gets a little bit murky. If you do a quick Google search on CX, you'll find hundreds of blogs and thought leadership articles telling you the benefits of CX. According to Zendesk's 2021 Customer Experience Trends Report, 75% of customers will spend more to buy from a company that offers good CX. An article in Cron says that CX management can boost profits by up to 125% each year. Similarly, a white paper by Forrester in 2015 suggested that from 2007 to 2014, the stock portfolio of CX leaders dramatically outperformed CX laggards. Now, if you're not a statistician, it's completely understandable why you might look at these figures and think CX can be a panacea for your business. But there are some major flaws in these types of analyses that make CX highly unpredictable. For example, if we return to Forrester's analysis, several CX leaders such as Borders and JCPenney actually saw their stock prices plummet during the observation period, despite having some of the highest CX scores. Other companies with really poor CX scores like Cigna and Comcast actually saw their stocks soar during that time. Now, I'm not suggesting CX is a dud, far from it. But the field is definitely surrounded by a lot of professional hoodoo, and in my experience, that's because a lot of the people who write and talk about CX don't have a strong background in statistics. Statisticians have a concept called covariance, and it basically refers to the fact that lots of different variables can interact with one another when we're trying to predict an outcome. For example, there's no doubt good CX management can help boost profits, but by up to 125%, now that's a very big ask. I'm sure Cron's analysis was very robust, but what it fails to tell us is what other variables were at play. Things like industry sector, customer trends, the competitive landscape, and marketing investment all play a huge part in determining whether or not a company will be profitable. What we see is that companies who invest heavily in CX are also the same companies who generally invest well in their staff, have good marketing budgets, and very clearly defined strategic planning in place. As statisticians, we need to properly control for these types of covariances when we're evaluating the impact of CX. A number of academics have attempted to do justice across different sectors, and a great example in the banking sector was a 2020 study by Jan Eklof, looking at financial institutions in Scandinavia. Eklof used structural equation modelling to control for many of the covariant factors that might have created ambiguity in their result. Their analysis found a statistically significant relationship between customer satisfaction and business performance, with a 1% increase in customer satisfaction producing around a 4.9% point growth in operating income on average, and a 5.6% point increase in profit margin. So although it does demonstrate that CX can have a positive impact for banks, the impact is certainly more modest than some of the figures we cited earlier. It's important to note Eklof's analysis was just on customer satisfaction. Other CX metrics, such as the notorious NPS scale, have actually proven to be relatively poor at predicting business outcomes. In fact, many academics now consider NPS to be completely unfit for purpose. So what does it all mean? Customer experience is clearly an important part of modern business, but don't be fooled into thinking a CX program will double your profit. It simply isn't realistic in most cases. More than that, make sure your CX feedback is measuring the right things in the right way Fun-looking surveys paired with poor methodologies simply won't meet your needs in the long run. Invest well and work with professionals who have demonstrated CX success. Don't be sucked in by pretty marketing materials that promise the world. Now, if you'd like more advice on how you can effectively use CX for your business, reach out or leave a comment on the video. Also, leave a like, it means a huge amount and really, really helps. Until next time, keep listening, build better relationships, and enjoy your milk.